What if Iraq had been able to acquire nuclear weapons in the 1980s during the Iran-Iraq War? Well, first, some context about the Iraqi nuclear program. In the early 1970s, Saddam Hussein had ordered the creation of a clandestine nuclear weapons program in Iraq. Additionally, in 1975, after 6 months, France had agreed to sell 72 kilograms of 93% uranium and built a nuclear reactor power plant without the International Atomic Energy Agency to control it. All of this came at the price of $3 billion for Iraq into France's pocket. In July 1980, Iraq received another shipment from France of approximately 12.5 kilograms of highly enriched uranium to be used in the reactor. This shipment was the first of the planned 6 deliveries for the 72 kilograms. It was reportedly stipulated in the purchase agreement that no more than 2 highly enriched uranium fuel loadings of 25 kilograms would be in Iraq at any given time. Again, this uranium was meant for the same nuclear reactor, and Italy also sought to conduct nuclear deals with Iraq. Skipping forward a bit to the Iran-Iraq War, which began on September 22, 1980, with an Iraqi invasion of Iran. Iraq had believed that Iran would not respond effectively due to internal socio-political turmoil caused by the country's Islamic Revolution 1 year earlier. However, Iraqi troops faced fierce Iranian resistance which stalled their advance into western Iran. In 2 months, the invasion came to a halt after Iraq occupied more than 25,900 square kilometers of Iranian territory. At dawn on September 30th, 4 Iranian F-4 Phantom IIs completed an aerial refueling near the Iran-Iraq border before flying into Iraqi airspace, where they deliberately climbed to a high altitude in order to be detected by Iraqi radar systems, albeit on a false course. A few moments later, 2 of the pilots peeled off and dropped to an extremely low altitude to avoid further detection, and subsequently changed course for the Iraqi nuclear facilities. This was Operation Scorched Sword, where Iran launched a surprise attack against the under-construction Iraqi Osirak nuclear reactor. This airstrike was the first attack on a nuclear reactor and the third attack on any nuclear facility in history. Iran had sought to thwart Iraq's progress in nuclear research and development, and due to the Iraq War, the Iranians feared a possible Iraqi nuclear weapons attack. Ultimately, the damage inflicted by Iran during Scorched Sword would not be absolute and would only set back Iraq's nuclear efforts by about 3 months. Less than a year later came the Israeli Operation Opera on June 7, 1981, where a flight of Israeli aircraft bombed the Osirak reactor deep inside Iraq. Israel called the operation an act of self-defense, claiming that the reactor had less than a month to go before it could become critical, and the airstrike reportedly killed 10 Iraqi soldiers and 1 French civilian, and it also severely set back Iraq's nuclear program as the reactor was destroyed. Israel also claimed that the reactor was very soon to being able to produce a nuclear bomb. Now what if, in an alternate timeline, the Osirak nuclear reactor was not destroyed and both of these operations either failed or never took place? Changes to make in this timeline would be if the Iraqis had more air defense systems around the reactor at the time of Operation Scorched Sword, as in our timeline it had minimal defenses. This will cause the Iranian aircraft to be shot down. Furthermore, Iran cannot launch the H-3 attack, where Iran dealt a major blow to Iraq's air power, where 27 planes were destroyed with another 11 damaged, which would have been able to seriously threaten Israeli aircraft during Operation Opera. Now that Iraq enriches uranium and builds an atomic bomb around 1982 or 1983, how will this not only impact the Iran-Iraq War, but also the greater power dynamics in the Middle East as well as the Cold War? Well, first things first, and that is the immediate impacts of the Iran-Iraq War. In 1982, Iran had moved into Iraq, and by 1983, the war was a stalemate, similar to World War I, with Iranian mass human wave attacks and Iraq utilizing chemical weapons. In this alternate timeline, the Iranians will definitely be in a worse state now despite the stalemate, because obviously Iraq now has a nuke. Iraq would be fearing a nuclear strike and may halt all offensives out of retaliatory fear. But would Iraq actually even consider dropping the bomb in Iran? Rationally, I'd say no, just because using a nuclear bomb against Iran would seriously trigger a massive international response against Iraq, and there are many other positives and power projections that Iraq can do with an atomic bomb instead of use it. However, Iraq is run by Saddam, who would execute even his most competent generals throughout the Iran-Iraq War out of fear of them becoming even more popular than him. But let's go with the idea that Iraq doesn't drop the bomb on Iran, and the power shifts in the Middle East would be dramatic to say the least. Iraq is now the most powerful country in the region due to even having a nuclear arsenal in the first place, which will definitely make Israel want to force an Iraqi disarmament, but more on that later. Saddam is seen as the undisputed leader of the Arab world, at least for now. A nuclear Iraq will be relatively unchallenged and free to expand its influence in the area, again, for the moment. With all of that, 1983 probably marks the end of the Iran-Iraq War, where the Iranian forces withdraw completely from Iraq, and Iran will also have a heavy war debt to Iraq. Additionally, Iran will have to withdraw all support for proxies throughout the Middle East, as Iraq can threaten or power project against Iran if they didn't. Furthermore, the Iranians will be devastated from the war, as before ending the conflict, I'm sure Saddam would have ordered a massive Iraqi offensive against Iran, with heavy bombardment and missile strikes against Iranian cities. With all of that, the UN will definitely be going absolutely insane about a nuclear Iraq. The fact that the Iraqis got an atomic bomb would be very embarrassing for the UN and cause some mass panic about other dictatorships getting nukes. Also, the UN will be pointing out a lot of fingers at France as well as Italy, providing Iraq with the means of even getting a nuclear weapon. But despite all the UN's talk, the main force behind getting things done is the UN Security Council, being of course the US, UK, France, Soviet Union, and China. And as you'd expect, France would probably be the first one to veto any kind of action against Iraq. It's also worth noting that during the Iran-Iraq War, pretty much most of the world had provided some kind of support to Iraq against Iran, as of course the Iranian revolution and regime was universally unpopular. But war is war, and some countries would sell to both sides. But all this means is that very little would probably be done to Iraq until after Iran surrendered and the Iran-Iraq War ended. But afterwards, the UN would want to get Iraq to somehow give up its nuclear capabilities. The overall impact on the 1980s will be that without Iran having proxies, things like the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing might not happen, as groups like Hezbollah won't be near as powerful as they were in our timeline. However, Ba'athist Iraq will fuel conflict in places like Syria, Lebanon, and Iran to spread their influence, which wouldn't really sit well with most of the international community. Of course, like I said before, Israel would be super mad that Iraq got a nuke, and would be calling for an all-out invasion to denuclearize Iraq pretty much right when the Iraqis get a nuke. But the question becomes, will Iraq be invaded by a coalition? Well, since Iraq has a nuke, nobody would really want to go into the country out of fear of being hit by an atomic weapon. So I feel like the UN would go with their one thing that they know best, and that is of course international sanctions on Iraq. Although Israel is definitely contemplating a preemptive strike on Iraq to remove the nuclear threat, but I don't think anyone else is going to think of invading Iraq. Just look at when North Korea got nukes. Nobody invaded the country, and North Korea was only hit by extreme sanctions. So I believe that something similar goes down with Iraq, unless of course Saddam invades another country, then all bets are off and it becomes liberation time. This is just one possible scenario about if Iraq got nukes in the 1980s during the Iran-Iraq War. What do you think would have happened? Write in the comments, and thank you for watching.